January 3rd, 2026, 2 o'clock in the morning. Delta Force fast ropes into Caracas as Maduro sleeps. By sunrise, he's cuffed. Trump tweets victory. And Venezuela's 303 billion barrels, world's largest reserves, stand poised for Houston refineries. This wasn't spur-of-the-moment aggression. It's the climactic frame of a 25-year timeline where Washington watched Venezuela nationalize its oil, sanctioned it into collapse, seized its American refineries, then flipped ownership through courts and commandos. Citgo's Gulf Coast plants, built for Orinoco heavy crude, wait hungrily. Chevron and Exxon I-field contracts. From Rockefeller's 1910s to Trump's 2026 raid, every step followed the script. Here's the complete chronology of America's Venezuelan oil reclamation. 1910. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil strikes Venezuela's first major fields. Lake Maracaibo gushers flow. By 1930, Venezuela pumps third most oil globally after America and Russia. Profits, American. Rockefeller engineers Creole Petroleum, nominally Venezuelan, fully U.S.-owned. Texas refineries adapt for extra heavy crude, 8 to 12 degree API gravity. Plants needing hydrocrackers and delayed cokers no one else builds. From 1920 to 1935, oil catapults from 2% to 91% of exports. Farms collapse, factories shutter, textbook resource curse. Venezuela prints wealth, Houston pockets it. 1976. President Carlos Andrés Pérez explodes. No more robbery. Nationalization sweeps foreign firms into PDVSA, Caracas's Aramco. Standard Oil, Shell exit with compensation. Billions return home. Golden Era. PDVSA hires Texas A&M grads. Builds global reputation. But corruption creeps. Executive pay rivals. Goldman Sachs. Vanity projects multiply. Oil peaks $110 per barrel by 2008. External debt still balloons. 1983, Black Friday crashes Bolivar amid debt crisis. Non-oil GDP shrinks 20% through 2002. Washington pivots strategically. 1986, PDVSA purchases 50% Citgo, America's heavy crude refining lifeline, completing ownership by 1990. The portfolio stuns. 3 mega refineries, Lake Charles, Lamont, Corpus Christi processing 900,000 barrels daily combined. Pipelines across 23 states, 13,000 gas stations serving 10% U.S. gasoline. Symbiosis perfected. Orinoco feeds Citgo crackers. Profits split continents. Venezuela controls refining fate. America holds physical plants. Hugo Chavez detonates 1999. Imperialism ends now. ExxonMobil, Chevron, ConocoPhillips lose billions in seized fields. Minimal compensation. Oil boom floods coffers. Economy peaks $143 billion. Per capita income tops Latin America. Chavez funds clinics, schools, housing. Diversification? None. Budget stays 90% oil dependent. Bolivarian socialism freezes currency, caps prices, nationalizes factories. 2006. 45% exports slake U.S. thirst. 13% American imports. While Chavez brands Bush the devil at UN. Nicolas Maduro inherits 2013 corpse. Oil crashes from $100 to $30 by 2014. PDVSA, national budget backbone, implodes. Price controls empty supermarkets. Hyperinflation hits millions % annually. Production plunges 2.7 million barrels daily to 1 million by 2019. 20,000 engineers flee. Rigs rust. No new wells since 2018. Factories idle at 30% capacity. GDP contracts 80%. PDVSA pawns Citgo for survival. 2016. 49.9% stake to Rosneft for $1.5 billion loan. 5.1% to bondholders for $2 billion. 100% collateralized. Venezuela trades refining empire for breathing room. 2017. Trump sanctions begin. Venezuelan bonds untradeable. Gold exports frozen. PDVSA can't service $120 billion external debt. January 2019. Juan Guaido declares presidency. Trump recognizes instantly. Treasury grants Citgo control to legitimate government. General License 4 shields refineries from creditors. 6-month protection, repeatedly extended 3 years. April 2019. PDVSA sanctions. U.S. firms barred from oil purchases. America, 50% buyer, vanishes. No diluents for heavy crude blending. Exports crash 60%. Production hits 800,000 barrels daily. 2020. Crystalex wins $1.4 billion Delaware judgment for seized mines. ConocoPhillips claims $8 billion oil fields. Total creditor pile, $20 billion. November 2021. Delaware Chancery Court rules Citgo shares belong to Guaido government. Auction process launches. First ever sovereign asset liquidation via U.S. courts. November 2024. Judge approves $5.9 billion Elliott management bid for Citgo shares. Full auction projected $25 billion. Venezuela appeals. Judicial piracy. December 2025. Trump tweets. Venezuela surrounded by largest South American armada ever. Return all oil, land, assets they stole. U.S. Navy seizes 3 tankers carrying 6 million barrels to Cuba. Chevron restarts 200,000-barrel Petro Independencia under license. January 3, 2026, 2 a.m. Delta Force captures Maduro. Interim government forms by noon. Trump. Venezuela will be great again. The 5-phase ownership flip. Phase 1. Infrastructure lock. Citgo refineries process 90% global extra heavy capacity. Orinoco undiluted. Unshippable sludge. Houston supplied 400,000 barrels daily diluents pre-sanctions. Phase 2. Debt weaponization. PDVSA collateralized 55% Citgo for $16 billion loans. Guaido recognition voided Russian-Chinese claims. Phase 3. Sanction strangulation. Blocked 50% market, swift access, spare parts. $700 billion GDP destruction claimed. Shadow Fleet limped 200 million barrels yearly to China at $20 discounts. Phase 4. Judicial heist. Delaware rulings, sovereignty, when assets sit on U.S. soil. $25 billion Citgo auction funds, nationalization victims. Phase 5. Regime reset. Maduro's fall voids foreign contracts as illegitimate. Orinoco blocks. 1/7 retendered. Chevron scales to 1 million barrels, 18 months. ExxonMobil revives Z6. Total, 3 million barrels daily by 2028. Numbers complete the transfer. Pre-crisis 2013. 2.7 million barrels, $90 billion revenue. Crisis low, 860,000 barrels, $17 billion. Post-flip projection, 3 million barrels at $70 Brent, $210 billion gross, $120 billion net. Services $30 billion debt, $20 billion rebuild, leaves $70 billion for pro-U.S. governance. China loses 5% global supply. Russia writes off $16 billion. Houston refineries secure 10% hemisphere production at $5 gas prices. Reserves unchanged. Control transfers seamlessly. Timeline echoes history. Iran, 1953. Nationalize, CIA coup. Shah opens fields. Iraq, 2003. Saddam seizes. Invasion, BP, Exxon. Libya, 2011. Gaddafi dollar threat. NATO, Total Energies. Venezuela, nationalize, sanction, seize Citgo, Delta Force. 3 takeaways. Venezuela owned dirt, America owned refineries. Sanctions proved who truly controlled oil. Nationalization without management capacity equals suicide. PDVSA decayed from world-class to rusting relic. Judicial encirclement trumps military invasion. $25 billion Delaware auction achieved what Marines couldn't. January 3, 2026 wasn't war, it was foreclosure. Maduro faced America's true oil weapon, the refineries that made 303 billion barrels valuable. Houston awaited. The ghost fleet collapse and refinery recalibration. Maduro's final lifeline crumbled through 400 ghost tankers steaming blind across Atlantic. These rusting supertankers, average age 25 years, disabled AIS transponders, forged Panamanian papers, carried no insurance. Crews of desperate Venezuelans earned $500 monthly. Captains pocketed $10 million facilitation fees per Asia cargo. Shadow Fleet moved 200 million barrels annually by 2025, one-third pre-sanctions volume, but at $20 discounts to Brent. China paid cash through UAE shells. India blended with Russian Urals. Washington tolerated the leaky operation, knowing each tanker lost $2 million monthly to inefficiencies. 20 vessels sank yearly, risking Exxon Valdez-scale spills in Caribbean. Post-raid, U.S. Navy impounded 50 ships off Aruba, ending charade. Citgo's 3 Gulf Coast refineries stood primed for recalibration. Lake Charles, 550,000 barrels daily. Lamont, 170,000. Corpus Christi, 150,000. Possessed 90% global extra-heavy crude capacity. These 1950s plants featured delayed cokers turning 8-degree API sludge into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel. PDVSA invested $10 billion upgrades through 2010, perfecting Orinoco chemistry. Sanctions idled them at 30% utilization. 400,000 barrels daily processing Malaysian heavy instead. Chevron engineers waited in Houston. 90-day hot restart possible. Ramping 800,000 barrels Venezuelan by July 2026. Each refinery's $15 billion enterprise value compounded daily as Orinoco flowed south. Rosneft's $16 billion Venezuela collapse exposed Kremlin's miscalculation. 2016 Citgo pledge, 49.9% stake, secured $1.5 billion loan, collateralized against 3 refineries plus 13,000 stations. Juan Guaido's January 2019 recognition voided transfer. U.S. Treasury General License 4 blocked for 42 months. Moscow refined 120,000 barrels daily. Urals blended Venezuelan crude domestically, but lost Western Hemisphere foothold. Strategic cost dwarfed financials. Putin's first Caribbean energy platform handed to Beijing. December 2025. Trump tweet. Rosneft writes off Venezuela. Preceded 50% Gazprom share drop. China faced 5% global supply extinction. Beijing's $10 billion infrastructure loans claimed first production rights, but interim Caracas government voided 42 PDVSA contracts as Maduro fraud. Shandong Teapot Refineries, processing 150,000 barrels daily Murray blend, shuttered overnight. 400,000 barrels daily diluent imports halted. Iranian condensate dried up. Middle East pivot cost $15 premiums versus Venezuelan discount. People's Daily called it century's energy robbery. Reality. Geography favored Houston, 600 miles, over Dalian, 12,000 miles. Chevron delivered 18-month scale-up. Sinopec needed 10 years. Delaware Chancery Court orchestrated $25 billion asset perfection. November 2024. Ruling established precedent. Sovereign assets under U.S. jurisdiction answer to Delaware when collateralized against American firms. Crystalex, $1.4 billion mines. ConocoPhillips, $8 billion fields. Owens, Illinois, $600 million glass, plus 20 smaller claims, totaled $23.7 billion. Elliott Management's $5.9 billion bid bought first lien position. Phase 2 auction, Chevron, Exxon, Valero, projected $19 billion by September 2026. Proceeds funded regime change ecosystem, Guaido salaries, opposition media, Aruba exile operations. Orinoco production math dictated urgency. 303 billion barrels certified, 650 billion recoverable, required 3 million barrels daily for Saudi-scale revenue. Extra heavy extraction cost $35 per barrel versus Saudi $8 light sweet. Refining added $20. $55 total versus $70 Brent. 3 million barrels yielded $150 billion net annually. Current 900,000 barrels produce $20 billion. Subsistence for 30 million citizens. Chevron's Petro Independencia scaled from 200,000 to 1 million barrels. 12 months. ExxonMobil revived Z6 block, 600,000 potential. ConocoPhillips reactivated Petrozuata, 400,000. Post-raid logistics locked American control. U.S. Navy secured Caribbean shipping lanes, 500-mile radius. 10 ice-class tankers awaited Orinoco terminal. Houston diluent resumed, 400,000 barrels daily, via Enterprise Products pipelines. 20,000 engineers redeployed from Columbia, Texas. $50 billion supermajor capex unlocked 20-year contracts at 40-year concessions. Caracas services $30 billion annual debt, rebuilds $20 billion infrastructure, retains $100 billion sovereign wealth, $8,000 per capita leap. Venezuela confirmed resource realism. 303 billion barrels flowed where hydrocrackers operated. Houston owned refining molecule by molecule. Trump activated pre-1976 infrastructure. Post-2019 sanctions. 2024 judicial rulings. 2026 regime reset. No tanks occupied Caracas. Gulf Coast cokers occupied Orinoco economics. Sovereignty yielded to chemistry. 600 miles trumped nationalism. Venezuela's ghost fleet represented Maduro's desperate final stand. A fleet of 400 ancient supertankers, averaging 25 years old, sailing dark with disabled transponders and forged papers. These floating hazards moved 200 million barrels annually to Asia by 2025, one-third of pre-sanctions volume, but commanded $20 discounts to Brent due to quality risks and facilitation fees. Chinese teapots in Shandong paid cash through UAE shells, while crews earned $500 monthly. Captains pocketed $10 million per voyage. The U.S. Navy's post-raid sweep impounded 50 vessels off Aruba, eliminating the shadow trade overnight and restoring clean shipping lanes for Chevron's ice-class tankers. Citgo refineries recalibrated with surgical precision following Maduro's fall. Lake Charles processed 550,000 barrels daily, Lamont 170,000, Corpus Christi 150,000, together controlling 90% of global extra-heavy crude capacity. These 1950s plants featured delayed cokers and hydrocrackers custom-built for Orinoco's 8-degree API sludge, with $10 billion in PDVSA upgrades through 2010, perfecting the chemistry. Sanctions had throttled them to 30% utilization on Malaysian heavy. 90-day hot restarts ramped 800,000 barrels. Venezuelan throughput by July 2026. Each refinery's $15 billion value, compounding hourly. Russia's $16 billion Venezuela misadventure exposed Moscow's blind spot. The 2016 Citgo pledge, 49.9% stake collateralizing $1.5 billion loans, evaporated when Juan Guaido gained U.S. recognition. Treasury General License 4 blocked transfers for 42 months straight, forcing Rosneft to blend 120,000 barrels daily into domestic Urals crude. Putin surrendered his first Caribbean energy beachhead to Beijing's discount grabs, with Gazprom shares dropping 50% after Trump's December 2025 write-off tweet. China confronted a 5% global supply catastrophe. Beijing's $10 billion infrastructure loans supposedly granted first production rights, but the interim Caracas regime voided 42 PDVSA contracts as Maduro-era fraud. Shandong's 150,000 barrel daily Marais blend operations shuttered instantly. 400,000 barrels daily diluent imports ceased alongside Iranian condensate. The Middle East pivot demanded $15 premiums over Venezuelan discounts, prompting People's Daily headlines of energy robbery. Geography proved decisive. 600 miles to Houston versus 12,000 to Dalian. Delaware's judicial machinery executed the $25 billion asset transfer flawlessly. The November 2024 Chancery Court precedent established that sovereign assets under U.S. jurisdiction answer to American creditors when collateralized against stateside firms. Crystalex claimed $1.4 billion for mines. ConocoPhillips, $8 billion for fields. Owens, Illinois, $600 million for glass factories. $23.7 billion total across 20 claimants. Elliott Management secured first lien for $5.9 billion. Chevron, Exxon, and Valero eyed $19 billion in Phase 2 auction by September 2026, funding the full regime change ecosystem.